I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned.
You're listening to The Critical Thought, where we challenge our listeners to use critical thinking when examining the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses.
I no longer live in fear or under obligation and guilt.
I tested Jehovah's Witnesses for truth.
Hi, I'm Daniel.
And this is JT.
And we're together for the first time. You may have seen us individually on separate videos, and now the Super Friends unite. JT, let's talk about critical thinking.
All right.
How do you define critical thinking?
Critical thinking, in my definition, how we look at it, is the person who is willing to think very critically, be willing to examine things with an open and unbiased mindset.
Okay. And when you think about Jehovah's Witnesses, which we both were, certainly in our heart and in our mind, where do most Jehovah's Witnesses fit on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being critical thinker, independent thinker doing research? That's a 10. A 1 is the opposite. What would you give based on your last 50 years with the Witnesses? Where do they rank?
Probably somewhere around 3 or less.
Tell us more about that. Why? Why do you give them that score?
The reason why is because as Jehovah's Witnesses, we were always trained, one, never to question what was written in the Watchtower. Just that simple. So that's why in order to be a critical thinker, if you were discouraged, you would never start. You were taught to look at everything you read as if God himself had written it. And that's the problem.
But in most witnesses' minds, if you were to ask them this, even those watching this video, they'd give themselves an 8, 9, maybe even a 10. How do you explain that?
Well, that goes back to what we said earlier in our discussion. Part of the training of a Jehovah's Witness is the Watchtower writers have been so skillful at literally making people view what they write as if it's from God. The Watchtower basically stated in many places that basically you need to view what we write as if it was from the voice of God himself.
So it's less about critical thinking and more of companion thinking, so to speak.
Absolutely.
They think it's critical thinking, but
Yes.
actually the critical thinking has been subcontracted out to the governing body, so to speak.
Pretty much.
And they're almost companions to that.
That's exactly right.
So what are the top 2 things that you'd recommend our viewers do to move from where they are to where they want to be on that same scale about critical thinking? Now, like if there are 3, in fact, let me say for the camera and for our viewers, I think one of the questions you want to ask yourself and maybe ask your family, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being critical thinker, independent research, where do you fit on a scale of 1 to 10? Because I think that self-assessment will give you some clues on how to close the gap. Let's talk about closing the gap. If there are 3 or a 5, how do they move from a 3 to a 7, a 5 to an 8?
Okay. One of the things that you mentioned was independent thinker. And that's what typically as a Jehovah's Witness, you're not.
Okay.
Someone else is doing the thinking for you. What we found for ourselves and people that we've talked to over the years is actually basically 2 things. As I tell people, 1, be willing to call a spade a spade. Be willing to let the chips fall where they may. Because if the teachings that you're examining will not stand on their own 2 feet, there's no need to try to hold them up.
All right. So what's the second thing that folks can do to move from where they are to where they want to be? Because where they want to be is where the truth resides. So whatever truth is, now if they're watching this video and they're committed at level 10 to be truth finders and truth tellers, that's in their heart. And you're saying in order to be a truth teller and a truth finder, you've also got to be a critical thinker, an independent thinker.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. And if they're not a 10, you've given us one thing that they should do. What's the second thing they should do to move up the scale of critical thinking?
Well, I'll give you a couple of things that they could take a serious look at.
Okay.
I encourage people to take a serious look at the Society's teaching on the overlapping generation. Go back, do your homework, do some digging, see where the foundation started at. That's very important because as Jehovah's Witnesses, we always prized ourselves on lovers of truth. Well, how can you have something that's truth today and tomorrow it's not? The second thing is I would have people, and I encourage people always, take a serious look at the Watchtower's position with the United Nations. Now, there are a lot of videos out there that deal with the United Nations and the Watchtower Society. The most important thing you need to consider is what is the relationship that the United Nations views towards its NGOs. This is the key. The United Nations, how do they look at its NGOs? And what you will find is they consider those partners.
So you said something that just caught my attention. You talk about levels of truth. Did you say that?
Yeah.
I thought there was only one level of truth. Where you going with levels of truth? Tell us more about that.
Well, sometimes what happens is people are looking at some information. And before you can declare something as truth, you need to progress up and do your research on it.
Okay.
That's the mistake that the Watchtower makes all the time. They will present, for example, the faithful and discreet slave. They were teaching at one time that Charles Taze Russell was the faithful and discreet slave. They called it truth. 2 days later, it's no longer truth. Now it's those who were from the early Christians all the way till today. That was the faithful and discreet slave. They declared it is truth. And then they reverse. Now we have an entirely different definition, which is really interesting. The definition we have now is basically Mr. Morris and his 6 colleagues up in New York.
Yeah, but we used to call that new light, right? So that was old light, new light. Is that what you're speaking about when you talk about levels of truth?
Yes. That's in terms of Jehovah's Witnesses, that is how they present things. But that is, as you mentioned, that is not the case. And you will find it to be very true. Something cannot be the truth today and tomorrow it is not the truth again. It has to be truth consistently.
So if an organization has changed its views on something they call truth, and in 10, 20, 30, 40 years they say there's new light, what does the critical thinker think about that?
Well, once again, if you are claiming that it is from God, then it will not change. But if it is merely the opinion of humans, that will change. And that's what you have to present it as. We're giving you our opinion. Leave it at that. Don't pronounce this is truth, and those who fail to follow it, you are somehow displeasing to God. And that's the basic problem that society has. They present so many things as truth from God, when in fact, it's just the opinion.
So what are the top 3 things that you have found over the course of your life that the organization presented as truth, light, and then they went on to change that? I mean, I think you've discussed some of them in terms of generation, new generation, or the next generation and the United Nations. But what are the big 3 that where the position has changed that you think critical thinkers, independent thinkers ought to have under the microscope?
Well, I know for myself and my wife, the big 3, and we did a video on this, the big 3 that we looked at was the generation teaching, alternative service, and the sheep and the goat. How that is fulfilled. And that's really what started us on that road to being willing to examine things that we have been taught all of our lives.
Critical thinking, having an open mind, asking yourself and your family, where are you now on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being independent thinker. Research shows, okay, this isn't scientific research, but JT's experience as an elder, etc., born in the truth, is most witnesses are probably about a 3. But they think that they're a 9 or a 10 because they're not really doing this critical thinking. They've subcontracted the critical thinking out to the organization. They're really doing companion thinking is what I'm hearing. And their homework assignment is to do what here in the next maybe couple of days are you recommending, Coach?
What we would recommend people to do is to find a subject that they have a question about, something they've always questioned about, and take the time to examine it. You're free to do that. No one can stop you from examining something that you have a question about.
Let me italicize something JT said about levels of truth. I'm a coach, a sales coach. You might find me on the internet from a business standpoint, but this video and the principles that we teach, well, let me get to the point. It's about an iceberg, 3 levels, 1D, 2D, 3D. Let me explain. The D is for depth. Above the water level, there's 1D critical thinking. Okay, that's surface level. And so you get surface level answers. I know I was guilty of that many times. Then there's 2D. Now that's at the water line. You're doing a little bit better. And I find that that's where most people kind of stop.
Yeah.
But then there's 3D, 3 levels of depth or distinction. And that's ultimately where you melt icebergs. I think critical thinkers get below the iceberg and melt icebergs. I think the average Jehovah's Witness does 1D and 2D thinking. What I hear JT and me saying is if you don't believe it, put it to the test, pick a subject, and go below the iceberg. I'm Daniel.
I'm JT.
And today's video was to help you on critical thinking.
You know, I enjoy talking to Daniel because he always has food for thought. But let me ask you, so what do you think of our discussion about critical thinking?
Well, you know what? I really thought that was interesting because
It was.
it always takes someone that can, like, look at things in a different manner.
That's true.
And for him to say that we subcontracted our thinking out to the organization,
Yeah.
I would have never, ever
that's pretty much true.
came up with that.
Yeah, that's pretty much true. That's what we often do. We
Right.
literally do that.
But you know what it reminds me of?
What's that?
It reminds me of the June 1st, 1967 Watchtower.
What does it say?
Let me read it.
Okay.
Let me read that. The June 1st, 1967 Watchtower says, we may think of study as hard work, as involving heavy research.
Okay.
But in Jehovah's organization, it is not necessary to spend a lot of time and energy in research, for there are brothers in the organization who are assigned to do that very thing, to help you who do not have so much time for this. These preparing the good material in the Watchtower and other publications of the society.
Oh yeah, yeah. So it's true. We
Interesting, huh?
we subcontract, and it's really funny when you think about it. If you take like an average congregation, 120, 110, 120 publishers, on a Sunday, you may have one, maybe two, maybe three individuals who would actually take the time to not only just look up the scriptures that are in the article, but to do any additional research outside of a society's publication.
Right.
Very, very few witnesses would do that.
Nope.
You will have like quotes sometimes the society will have in an article. The average witness has absolutely no idea where the quote comes from, because many times society does not put a bibliography at the back of the article so you can go and actually research it yourself.
Right.
And
now, you know what? I was one of those people because
so was I.
You're so busy,
Yeah.
right? Okay. So when you think about it, you think about how
Yeah.
busy you are as a Jehovah's Witness, and you trust the organization.
Yeah, you trust
You
them.
trust that they would not do you wrong.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, okay, there's a scripture here that corroborates this paragraph that they're making this point in. But you know what? After we left, what I discovered is that a lot of times the organization was taking these scriptures out of context.
Yeah, and that's the
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
And so here you're thinking, you're trusting the brothers.
Yeah.
You're thinking, they've been appointed to give us our food at the proper time, and you're thinking they would not do you wrong.
Yeah, and
You know?
as the article you read says, basically, don't worry about doing no heavy research. We'll do it for you. Find what parts we want you to know, and we'll tell you.
Exactly.
And that's what the average witness does.
Right. But think about this too. You're so busy, and I remember being in the organization, and it's like every day you were like a hamster in a wheel.
Yep.
And the reason why is because not only did you have your Watchtower obligations to, your field service, your studying, you're preparing for your meetings, but then you had your own personal life that you had to do, as well as going out in field service.
Yeah.
So that's why a lot of people was just letting them, do all the
everything.
research and stuff for
As
them.
he says, subcontracted out to.
Right. That was an excellent antidote.
Yeah, and we had a disc overseer, well, before they fired them all,
Oh, God.
who always said, we got to keep the friends busy. We got to keep the friends busy. And and the society has a structured program that literally keeps people busy. One of the other things that Daniel mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, he was talking about the types of research that we do.
Right.
And he referred to it as you can do up to like 3D.
Oh, right. That
the
was
depth in
interesting.
terms of the depth of research.
Right.
1D, 2D, and 3D. And it's interesting because most of us, we would do the 1D, the 2D, but you could always tell when you were going into the 3D research. That's where they tried to shut you down.
That's exactly right.
You started asking the wrong questions.
They'll pull out the A word on you, apostasy,
Yeah.
in a heartbeat,
And-
in a New York minute, right?
And that's really your flag that you're now entering in the 3D type of research, critical thinking, questions that you're posing.
Right,
And
right.
one thing is for sure, they will literally shut you down.
Right.
And because of the culture, most Jehovah's Witnesses know when they venture down toward the 3D, they're stopped. And they either have two choices. You either can decide, I want to know what the answer is, and continue on, or like you said, they'll start throwing out, well, you sound like you might be getting into apostasy. No, I'm just asking some critical thinking questions that you can't answer intelligently.
And you know what, when you think about that, and that's why I'm so glad that you and Daniel had this conversation, and he brought it out like that and broke it down, because when you really look at life, what could be so bad that you would ask a question and someone would accuse you of being an apostate?
Yeah.
I mean, because when you think about it, in the Bible, you have prophets of old that actually questioned God directly.
Yes.
And they were never threatened with death.
No.
You know, and then here you are as an individual asking a question, or maybe you found some information on the internet. Because I've seen where we've gotten a lot of, people that have emailed us and stuff like that, and, they've come across some videos on the internet, and they started to ask questions about what they've actually, found information about. And they wanted to ask a question to the elders or even their husband. And then all of a sudden they're being carted off to, they're being accused of, doing something that's the unforgivable sin or something,
But see, that takes us back to what Daniel and I were discussing about the type of research people doing. Once you hit the 3D, you will know it.
That's right.
Because it is at that point the shutdown starts, the accusations start, where you don't love God, you're an apostate. No, I'm just asking a question. And when you think about, we're talking about you asking a question about something that's written in a magazine that they will openly acknowledge, oh, this is not inspired, oh, this is not infallible, then how do you then not be able to ask questions about it?
Right.
You can't have it both ways. And so, it's kind of interesting how that plays out. So, I mean, it's very interesting, and that's why, we stress, on our site, the importance of critical thinking.
Right.
And that's the reason why, we have on our site for people to understand that, our philosophy is real simple.
I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned.
And when you work through things from that perspective, then there's nothing that you can ask questions about. Yep.
And I think for me, when you look at the critical thinking aspect, it takes me back to my childhood when I used to ask those questions, and you were this innocent person wanting to know the answer. And then all of a sudden, you get older and you begin to study the Bible with the Jehovah's Witnesses the way we did. And then all of a sudden, it's like once you've crossed over this threshold of, dedication and baptism, it's almost like now those questions that you had, you can no longer ask those questions anymore.
Absolutely. That's true.
And so
that's a good point.
It's just something for people to think about, for all of you who are, all the people that are looking at our videos and so forth, we really, stress critical thinking. And for me personally, in talking to people, because I felt like I did not know, or I was not smart enough to look at something and read it and be able to interpret it for myself. So I was thinking that the society was smarter than me. And so I began to dismiss things that I was beginning to wonder in the back of my mind. And that's what a lot of people will end up doing as well, is that they don't think that they're smarter than the society. And so they'll just go ahead and continue to read those magazines.
They'll contract out there.
Yeah, they're subcontracting their thinking out to the organization. Don't do that. I tell people, don't do that.
Whatever you do, don't do that.
So anyways, I really enjoyed that discussion that you guys had. So, in conclusion, do not subcontract your thinking out to other people.
Think for yourself. This is JT.
And this is Lady C.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.